How are you?
This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Well, I think we can start, right?
Yes, we will start. Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Alan Landay from Rush University in Chicago. Welcome to everybody. A good morning, a good afternoon, and good evening to everybody from all over the world who's attending this very exciting seminar. And it's great to have all these wonderful speakers from all over the world today who will tell us that what we're celebrating today is International Women and Girls in Science Day. This is a phenomenal opportunity to celebrate our accomplishments of women from all over the world and what they've done and contributed to science, as well as others like myself who've worked with women and collaborated to help build careers of folks along the way. I would also like to congratulate the Embassy of Italy for this day and their support of this meeting and what they are doing to help promote the area of women and girls in science, and especially today, which is a Women's Eye on Immunology. We'll hear a lot more about what has been contributed by these magnificent investigators in the field of women in science. About my own self, I'm a professor of medicine at Rush University in Chicago. I have worked as a department chair of immunology, so I have a history of over 40 years of working in the field of immunology, and have worked many times with women investigators and women faculty throughout my career. And it's been a great honor to work with many of the leading women scientists in the world who've contributed so greatly to the understanding of immunology. And I think it's really changed over the last 40 years of my career, as you'll hear from many of the women today, how they have worked and what has shaped their careers in science and research, and what are the contributing factors, who have been their mentors and who have really moved them and the field forward. I'd just like to say that today for the attendees, that this webinar will be recorded, and there's an opportunity at the end. If you do have particular questions for our panelists, please ask them. It's now my great honor to introduce Madam Ambassador Mariangela Zappia, who will be our first speaker and will give some opening comments. Madam Ambassador, to you, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Landay. It's a pleasure to meet you on the screen, and thank you very much for accepting to moderate this very important webinar today. And I'm really delighted and happy to open this webinar on women in science, and in particular in the field of immunology. Thank you, of course, to Mrs. Annie Dumont, Program Specialist, Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action of UN Women Ethiopia. And thank you to Dr. Adriana Albini, President of the Top Italian Women Scientists. Naturally, my thanks goes to the distinguished panelists who will be delivering what I'm sure will be a very insightful remarks later on. So why are we here? First and foremost, as Dr. Landay said, to mark the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And I think it's extremely important to keep promoting equal access for women to science, raising awareness on the topic, and looking at equal study and career opportunities in the field. And the Italian government and the embassy are very committed to this important topic. And believe me, I take it as also as a personal priority. I'm also an international gender champion. I really believe in this. By focusing on the success of female researchers in the field of immunology, and especially on COVID-19 and infectious diseases, this webinar also aims to enhance the Italian cooperation with the US in research, and to promote bilateral cooperation. Italy and the US enjoy a long and productive collaboration in science and in medicine, and the pandemic has brought us even closer. In fact, we joined the effort from the get-go, working together, sharing data, best practices, and ideas in response to the complex challenges presented by the global pandemic. We are still doing it. In the field of life science, Italy and the US have numerous fruitful collaborations. In 2019 only, Italian universities and research institutes signed 25 framework agreements conventions and projects for research in the biomedical field with the US counterparts. Furthermore, the presence in the US of over 15,000 Italian researchers, according to data from the National Science Foundation, and of a number of Italian professors in American university that has grown by over 6% a year in the last decade, represents a key tool for our solid cooperation. Within this extremely fertile environment, new innovative projects are flourishing, such as the Center for Biotechnologies and Biomedical Research of the RIMED Foundation, established in Carini in Sicily, and the Human Technopole Center in Milan. With their international projection and strong ties with the US, projects like these testify to the importance of relations between Italy and the United States in this crucial sector for our future, that is that of life science and biotech. STEM disciplines are game changer in our societies. However, despite the great strides made, an overarching problem regrettably continues to endure, and this is really the gender gap. Their remarkable discoveries notwithstanding, just 33% of the world's researchers are women. Just 1 in 3 science and engineering researchers in the world is a woman. Many studies show that women in STEM publish less, are paid less for their research, and do not progress as far as men do in their careers. The gender gap first emerges during adolescence already. There are several reasons why fewer women pursue STEM degrees, including unconscious and implicit bias, favoring male candidates, wage gaps, and lack of role models. And this is really where we are focusing today also. I strongly believe in the importance of role models, and as I have seen, the difference that makes. The impact women can make on girls, students, and peers starting from very early in school is incredible, both in terms of steering towards career and in boosting their confidence. Many girls interested in STEM don't even know women in STEM's career. So having a mentor who proves that female success in a male-dominated field is possible is truly crucial. Interestingly, in Italian, the words innovation, creativity, curiosity are all female nouns, as are science and technology. And I think this is, in a way, indicative of the often quoted 50% of the population's potential to explore, discover, develop, and innovate. So with this in mind, I really would like to conclude by quoting a famous scientist who said, I told mother of my decision to study medicine. She encouraged me to speak to father. I began in a roundabout way. He listened, looking at me with that serious and penetrating gaze of his that caused me such trepidation, and asked whether I truly knew what I wanted to do. That scientist was Nobel Prize winner Rita Levi-Montalcini, and the rest is history. So with that, thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Ambassador, for those extremely inspiring remarks and really setting the stage for this really important meeting to talk about the role of women and girls in science, and especially as we move into newer innovations in immunology and infectious disease and COVID-19. I'd like to now call upon our next speaker, Annie Dumont, who is the program specialist in women, peace and security, and humanitarian action for UN Women. Annie, it's a great pleasure, and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Landé. Her Excellency Mariangela Zappia, the Ambassador of Italy to the United States of America, Dr. Adriana Albini, President of the Top Italian Women Scientists, distinguished guests, colleagues from UN system, international organizations, and CSOs, all protocols observed. On behalf of Madame Letty Shiwaha, UN Women Representative to Ethiopia, AU, and UNECA, I wish to appreciate the opportunity extended to UN Women Ethiopia Liaison Office to join this commemorative event and dialogue session to share experiences on initiative to advance women and girls' empowerment in science. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the norms and principles of gender equality and non-discrimination are at the core of all fundamental human rights treaties. Girls' exclusion from education and participation in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics intersects with other issues such as discriminatory patterns in ownership and exploitation of land, inheritance, and maternal-maternity, employment, and the feminization of poverty, among others. In the era of the fourth industrial revolution, competency in STEM is critical for professionals seeking global leadership in today's competitive, technologically driven economy, and with the increased demand for global leaders with STEM background. Advancing girls in science, technology, education, and mathematics remains a critical priority, as evidence shows that 90% of professions will be totally or partially linked to digital technology, and some 2 million new jobs will be created in the STEM fields. However, across Africa, only 28% of girls and women are engaged in STEM. Gender norms, stereotypes, biases, and sexual harassment emerge as the key obstacles to proportional representation of women in male-dominated STEM fields. As a result, most women will remain in jobs that are likely to be replaced by technology, lower paying, or less economically impactful in an increasingly technologically driven world. Therefore, closing the gender digital divide, overturning stereotypes, and encouraging women and girls to use ICTs and pursue careers in technology should remain a critical priority for accelerating sustainable development. The African Girls Can Code is among these flagship initiatives that UN Women, together with its partners, will continue to spearhead to bridge the technological gender divide. The African Girls Can Code initiative is a 4-year program which was launched in 2018 through a partnership with the African Union Commission, UN Women, and the International Telecommunication Union, with the view of training and empowering women and girls, provide them with the pathways to contribute and participate in material ways to Africa's innovation, industrialization, and growth. Since the launch of its first phase, we successfully built the knowledge and skills of girls from 32 African Union member states and empowered them to pursue education and innovation in ICT through different programs. Our key achievements thus far include coding camps training that reach hundreds of girls, the development of an EU guideline for mainstreaming gender and ICT into national curricula, media campaigns, and the development of the African Girls Can Code initiative e-learning platform. In addition, Storybook with stories of innovation and a short animation video to enhance the visibility of the initiative and the contribution of learners was produced to inform the advocacy and networking. The second phase of the program will be launched soon. To ensure that women and girls benefit meaningfully and become strategic contributors to the development in Africa, our efforts need to be coordinated. And this requires identifying and addressing the barriers that prevent them from pursuing careers in STEM. As I close, I wish to affirm UN Women's continued commitment to work with various actors, including private sector institutions under the leadership of the African Union, to advocate for policies that advance the mainstreaming of gender and STEM in national curriculum and ensure that African girls are at the forefront of the continent's development. To make transformational impact, however, we will work closely with member states and other stakeholders who will be central to the realization of the gender and digitalization agenda through concrete and contextually relevant programs that put girls at the center of the efforts. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for those, again, wonderful remarks about where women and girls and advancing in especially the African continent and how things are really developing there with a lot of new initiatives through UN Women. I think this is a magnificent start to the program to hear. I'd like to now move on to our next speaker, Adriana Albini, president of the Top Italian Women Scientists. This organization is a club that brings together women who stand out for their high scientific productivity and high number of citations with an H index equal to or greater than 50, who've made substantial contributions to the development and biomedical field and clinical science and neuroscience. Adriana is herself a scientist. She works at the European Institute for Oncology, IEO, in Milan, and she's a professor of immunology and general pathology in the Department of Medicine at Milano Bicocca University. Adriana, it's my great pleasure to listen and introduce you and hear your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for the introduction. Madam Ambassador, thank you for hosting us. And Annie, Alba, Guido, and Delia, hi to you. I would like to use my 5 minutes to show, since, you know, a few things related to this day. And I'm talking, we have this, you know, getting together in the Women in Science Day, International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And this is the 7th time this is done, and has the aim to recognize the role of women and girls not only as beneficiaries but as agents of change. So agents of change is a key word. And as we heard from the ambassador, we have major, you know, problems, but and we would need much more time to talk about them. But one is that still few girls go into STEM disciplines. This is recent data also from Alma University, that the majority of women are in non-STEM discipline in university, while the majority of men are in STEM disciplines. And you heard that what STEM means, which is mostly mathematics and engineering. Also, one of the, you know, other question is that women career, as you heard, even when the pipeline is similar, like for instance in medicine, progression to career is easier for men, and for instance, full professor are largely men rather than women. So something happens during the career that doesn't allow for progression and success. Therefore, I decided in 2016 to found a club, which is called Top Italian Women Scientists, as you heard. And we have logos, which I like very much. This is a woman studying the scientific disciplines. And here is 3 women together that hold hands. That means that this club should help also making a network. And it collects women that have a high H index, that is a number of papers cited highly, and the threshold is like 50. And I was amazed myself when searching in a data bank how many of those there are. Here you see how crowded this slide is. This is in alphabetical order. We are about 100 in just biomedical scientists, and this is really a very big patrimony. And I decided that these women have to be rewarded. So together with the Observatory of Women Health in Italy, we organized days where we present the women and give them a diploma of top scientists. And this is a very special moment. You see all the awardees. And I like particularly this photo, which is of 2 years ago, where Delia was awarded. Delia Goletti was present today, together with another top woman. This is one of the best pediatric researchers in Italy, Susanna Esposito. And we try to be present also in the somehow in the media, because women are very often invisible. Even when they're good scientists, they don't make it to the media. So this is #1 newspaper in Italy, Corriere della Sera, and here are some of the women of the top club, and this is me when I'm a fencer, so you know that can be NFA, can be always useful for this. And so this is just a very brief presentation of an idea to put together women and show that they can have numbers and also be very good communicators. And as Alan said, I'm also an immunologist, and curious enough, I work on natural killer cells. This is a cancer discovery paper this year, and I work on cancer associated decidual light, so sort of feminine natural killer cells. So we do also some gender immunology. So thank you very much and for this opportunity.
Well, thank you again for those wonderful remarks, Adriana. That's really, again, inspiring to see what your group has done globally to engage women scientists from around the world and really engage them to really enhance the ability of women to succeed in their careers. We'll now move on to the next part of our program that will focus really on the immunology part of our program and individual investigators who come from the field of immunology with various backgrounds. It's really my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Delia Goletti. Delia is the head of the Translational Research Unit at the National Institute for Infectious Disease at Lazzaro Spallanzani in Rome, Italy. She's a professor of pathology at the University of Roma as well. Her current research interests are on immune pathogenesis, immune diagnostic tests, and immune responses to tuberculosis and COVID. She's also among the most 60 cited scientists worldwide for COVID-19 and tuberculosis research. It's my great pleasure to now introduce Delia and hear her remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for this presentation, and thank you all. I'm going to project my presentation, and while is projecting, I take the opportunity to thank the Excellence, Madam Ambassador Maria Angela Zappia, for this great opportunity, and all the organizers of this event. I am an infectious disease specialist, and therefore I would like to tell you how I do research. So I start with a clinical unanswered question, and I try to find answers from science, either a new diagnostic test or a new therapy. If the experimental results are robust, then we need clinical validation at the patient's side, so at the bedside. And this process from research to the bedside is bidirectional and continuous. And this is how I do research with my group. So when COVID came, we faced either to find a new therapy and also to find new diagnostic tools to measure T-cell immunity against the virus. So I start to tell you the story about one of the therapies that we found useful for this disease. So only to give you a bit of background, once the virus, this is an example of SARS-CoV-2, enters in a body, it causes a great level of inflammation that can lead to tissue damage in the different organs, leading to severe disease and leading to what the Scientific American Journal called the immune havoc of COVID-19. And this is beautifully presented in this painting by Brian Stauffer. And therefore, if we wanted to find a drug, One could be drugs already known as anti-inflammatory drugs. And with a colleague that is a rheumatologist, Fabrizio Cantini, we focused on baricitinib, which is a well-known anti-arthritis rheumatoid, that is anti-inflammatory drugs. It was shown also to have potential antiviral effects, and we demonstrated in clinical trials and in vitro experimental tests that this drug could be of benefit for patients with COVID-19. And based on these results and the results from other well-known researchers worldwide, now baricitinib is a drug for COVID-19 patients pneumonia hospitalized with this disease. And in this paper, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, we provided evidence on where this drug could be useful. Another thing that I was interested to was the possibility to have a simple, easy test able to measure the T-cell specific response against SARS-CoV-2. T cells are one of the arms of the immune systems, like B cells that produce antibodies, that are very important for fighting COVID-19. For the cells already infected with the virus, or B cells are important because with antibodies, they are able to neutralize the virus itself. And these arms of the immune system are very important, and they are so important that also are induced by the vaccines against COVID-19 that we normally use. And then, so I had the tool to measure in an easy way the T-cell specific responses against the virus. And I wanted, with my group, to evaluate if in patients that have rheumatological diseases or multiple sclerosis that use drugs that impair the T or the B cell responses, I wanted to evaluate if these drugs actually impair the COVID vaccine-induced immunity. And we showed that these drugs normally used for the treatment of this disease actually do reduce the ability to respond either by T cells or by B cells to the COVID vaccine compared to the healthy controls. Why these results are important? Because based on these results, we know that if these patients, although vaccinated, if these patients are exposed to SARS-CoV-2, they are not fully protected. So we need to do something more for them, like, for example, to provide them monoclonal antibodies and or antiviral. So we provide an algorithm to help them out. As we all know, COVID-19 has brought darkness, especially at the beginning in our lives, because several lives were taken and because the economic crisis that it caused. However, I think science brought light, and the women were part of this process of bringing light. And as it has been beautifully said before me, today is the day of the celebration of women and girls in science. And I think we need to support women as part of this process of enlightening the world. And this is my vision and my wish for all of you. I thank deeply my group, because without them nothing can be I could do. Especially I thank all the women and the men that are very talented. And I thank also the people that with whom I did all the research that I presented, Fabrizio Cantini, the rheumatology I presented you, people in my institution, Emanuele Nicastri and Fabrizio Palmieri, and the neurology center with Claudio Gasperini for the study in multiple sclerosis, the beautiful collaboration I have with Alessandro Sette and his group in the United States, and of course, Tony Fauci. I've been with him in his lab for 4 years during the AIDS epidemic, and he has been me a big, important teacher on showing me how science can change the life of patients every day. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Delia, for these inspiring remarks about how your work has impacted the COVID-19 pandemic. As we move forward, we'll note and see how some of the drugs you've studied, like baricitinib, and I think it's really great to see the science that's come out of this and the opportunities to see how we'll further our understanding of COVID and hopefully move from the darkness into more light, and next time be together to celebrate this important day in everybody's lives. I'd like to move on and introduce our next speaker, Alba Grifoni. Dr. Grifoni is an instructor in the La Jolla Institute for Immunology in the laboratory of Professor Alessandro Sette, who we just heard about. She was awarded a prize by ISN, AFF, and the Italian Embassy for her research in COVID-19. Her work is focused on understanding how T cells recognize SARS-CoV-2, as was mentioned several times by Dr. Fauci, and more recently for her own studies, which she coordinated in studying the Omicron variant of concern that was published in Cell, and she will talk about her work today from Alpha to Omicron. And now we're learning, as we know, more about our Greek alphabet. Alba, over to you.
Thank you very much, Alan. And I rather say it's very exciting being part of this fantastic team and coming after such a powerful woman speech, like the one that we heard from the Madame Ambassador, as well as the other women scientists, is actually challenging. And I'm actually, I hope that I'm gonna instead showing an example of a young scientist that is at the early stage of her career, and perhaps provide a little bit of hope for the girls that are interested in science to actually pursue this career. And so, as Delia was explaining very nicely before, when we talk about SARS-CoV-2 in general, and particularly in the context of vaccination, the immune response act really like a teamwork, and that is similar to what we want to achieve also if we want gender equality in science. We need the help from both women and men. And so if we think about the immune response, really, we're looking at the antibodies, and those are terrifically important to prevent the infection, but also help in preventing the spread of this infection. But once the virus infects the cells, the antibodies don't see it anymore. And so this is why I've been particularly focused my interest and my entire career in understanding how T cells recognize this infection. And in particular, when we think about how T cells recognize infected cells, they don't really look inside the cell, but actually an infected cells chop piece of these viruses. And those are presented to the T cells thanks to HLA molecules. Maybe you might be familiar with HLA molecules because those are usually looked at for transplantation. And that is because HLA is one of the most variable genes in the human genome. So each one of us will have a T cell response that behaves slightly differently because we have different variation of the same HLA. And so I was interested in understanding that. And throughout the last 2 years, I actually looked into that quite in depth and found that T cells in reality recognize multiple proteins behind the spike. And therefore that suggests that in the context of new generation of vaccine, if we want to actually trigger more of a T cell response, we do have other proteins we can look at. They're probably less impacted by the variants. And that kind of merged a little bit with the second part of my research that has been going on in the last 1 year, to understand how T cells really recognize the different variants. And we start this adventure with our first paper last year, looking at the early variants. And then we expanded recently in this Cell paper, trying to understand and respond to multiple questions. So do we see evaluation or a change in the capability of T cell response to recognize the different variants? And do we see a difference if we look at different type of vaccination or at different time points? So how long you are from the last vaccination dose. And in our findings, what we found is that in reality, T cells are pretty stable, and they're able to recognize the different variants, no matter the vaccine that you receive, and no matter how far you are from vaccination. But in particular, when we look at the later time point more in detail, what we see is indeed that Omicron is affecting particularly a branch of the immune response, the B cell side. Still, we have over 40% of the response still conserved, and that actually explains why it is true that we have a lot of breakthrough infection after vaccination, but thanks to the booster dose and also to the residual presence of memory response from the B cells activated by the vaccination, we do actually still have a little bit of protection from the infection. And in helping that, the T cells instead are pretty much conserved. And that doesn't change much whether we look at the previous variants or the most recent variant. And so when we start to dig a little bit more into the detail, what we find is that in reality, particularly for the T cells, it really depends on the person. And so we try to give a glance into that and trying to understand how person A can respond to the virus versus person B. And what we found is that in general, still 80% of the response are conserved in Omicron, therefore overall suggesting that part of the reason why the majority of the infection we see as of right now with the Omicron are mild, and that is also due to the fact that the T cells are still there working as a team with the rest of the component of the immune system to actually limit this virus to actually spread in your body. And so part of the work that we have been also doing, and I consider quite important, is also to ensure that the science is carried out in multiple countries at the same time and with the same availability. And so our lab in particular has been committing in sharing reagent to really detect the T cell response. And in the latest collaboration in Omicron, we were actually able to simultaneously share these pools to 4 different labs all over the world. And all together, we reached the same conclusion that T cells really are still conserved. And that was pretty huge because basically what we managed to do was to have multiple labs all over the world that try to address the same question at the same time. And so that was very powerful, and I was very happy to be part of this. And I would like to conclude with the fact that indeed science is a teamwork, and behind all the results that I show you, and I had the pleasure to coordinate, there is a huge team behind it. And I'm happy to show to you particularly that this is quite equilibrated in terms of gender. We have a lot of women in different stages of their career, and that is also possible because we have 2 fantastic men, Professor Seth and Crotty, that really try to foster our career moving forward. And so with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alba, for those really wonderful remarks, telling us and keeping in mind the role of T cells in Omicron immunity, and the fact that we're now thinking beyond antibodies and thinking about the role of T cells in immunity, and the fact that you, as a young scientist, created this global network of collaborators, especially among other women scientists around the world. So congratulations, and this is a wonderful contribution to the field and really celebrates the day of women in science. I'd like to move on to our next speaker, Guido Silvestri. Guido is a longtime friend and colleague, and he is currently professor and chair in the Department of Pathology and Lab Medicine at the Emory University School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. He's also chief of division of the Microbiology and Immunology group at the Yerkes National Primate Center in Atlanta as well. It's a great pleasure, Guido, to hear about your remarks on today's International Day that we're celebrating for women and girls in science. Guido.
Thank you, Alan, for the kind introduction. Thank you to the organizers. I'm very glad to meet Ambassador Zappia. You're my number 4 ambassador after I was looking back, in the years, Vento, Bisognero, Varicchio, you probably heard all those names. And I'm glad to, in 29 years of America.
The first woman.
The first woman, and I'm very happy to have the first woman. That you're absolutely right. Today I'm not going to show any scientific data. Delia and Alba and Adriana already have done that. I feel a bit like an intruder here. As a typical middle-aged white male that is omnipresent. In these situations, but I'll try to be part of this celebration. It's a joy to be with some, very good friends. Delia and I have known each other since I don't know. Can we say that it's been 28 years, since the first time we met, at the NIH, when I was doing a sabbatic with Rafik Sekali in Tony Fauci's lab, and Delia was there. So time flies. Delia has done fantastic work on baricitinib, and his work that you probably know, Delia, is very dear to me because my own team, published the first primate study on baricitinib, about a year ago in Cell, which was really nice, hopefully a nice complement to your wonderful work in humans. It's a joy to see Alba. Alba comes from the shop of two dear friends of mine, Alex Seth and Shane Crotty, and she's been a joy. It's been a joy to see the progression of Alba's career. And we're not talking about some kind of postdoc who just takes orders. I mean, Alba has been a driver and the main driver of this work, and I know you're going to have a wonderful, wonderful future ahead of you. And I'm so proud to have seen you since the very beginning. It's a joy. The celebration of women in science. I want to start with an optimistic remark. In the sense that things are getting better. I was looking at the list of Nobel Prize winners in medicine. So the Nobel Prize for medicine was established in 1901. And guess what? The first woman to get it was in 1947. It took 46 years for a woman to get the Nobel Prize, and was the famous Gertie Therese Corey, the discoverer of the Corey cycle, and for those who remember biochemistry a little bit. And then it took another 30 years to get the second woman to get a Nobel Prize for medicine, Rosalind Yalow. And after that, we actually got 10 more over the years. And I had the privilege of meeting two of them. One, very briefly, was the great Italian senator and scientist Rita Levi Montalcini, who was already mentioned, I remember, by Ambassador Zappia. And in the Nobel Prize winner of 2008, which I consider a personal friend and a great mentor of mine, Françoise Barré-Sinoussi, the co-discoverer of HIV, the virus that I've been studying for many years. There are many other women that has been extremely important in my career that I see as mentors in both medicine and science and life. And I just want to take a couple of minutes to mention that, because it's so important in my life. In my field, my predecessor as director of the Division of Microbiology and Immunology was Dr. Harriet Robinson, a pioneer. In fact, a pioneer in the studies of mRNA vaccines. Harriet Robinson holds the first patent for mRNA vaccines, the ones that sort of saved the world from COVID in a lot of ways. And her role has been not really acknowledged much during this pandemic. I mean, as you know, mRNA technology has been, it's changed a lot over the years. So, but certainly it's a good opportunity today to remember the work by Harriet in that regard. I also, had 2 or 3 colleagues like Beatrice Hahn, Sharon Lewin, Gundi Herdol, Julie Overbaugh, and others that have been so important in the development of my career. From the clinical side, a great mentor of mine has been Sharon Weiss. Sharon Weiss is an emeritus chair and emeritus professor. So one of my predecessors as chair of the Department of Pathology here at Emory University in Atlanta. And she is the world leader in the field of bone and soft tissue tumors. So she's the author of this book that is the Bible of soft tissue tumors, sarcomas, in other words. And I've had the fortune to work with her, under her, and to learn, so much in terms of how to be, trying to be a good leader. Speaking of that, I also want to mention 3 colleagues, Caroline Meltzer, Carol Henderson, and Cheryl Heron from Emory University, 3 associate deans who really have been extremely important over the past few years in my career and my life in emphasizing the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the in the leadership that we do in medicine and in science, and it's really important to get to have a structured training, in issues like subconscious bias, and things like that. But I want to finish on a personal note with two people that have been really, really important in my life, that are both, women in science. One is my wife, my own wife, Ansha Rudy, who's and the mother of my three kids, who's an MD, PhD, NIH-funded investigator here at Emory. Alba knows her well, and Delia, I think, knows her well through the collaboration with Bambin Gesù and other groups in Italy. And, really having side by side, someone who really lives the values of women in science and medicine has been incredibly important. But the ultimate mentor for me has been my mother. My mother was a pediatric and public health specialist, medical doctor. My mom was born in 1928. She started medical school in 1946. I believe, Ambassador Zappia, that in 1946, there were about 25 women in all of Italy that were going to medical school, immatriculated. My mom, graduated in 1953 from the University of Perugia. I have her MD diploma framed in my office. She passed away at age 90 in 2018. She fought her entire life to promote, healthcare and public health for kids, for adults. She was a practicing pediatrician, a practicing public health officer. She vaccinated, literally tens of thousands of kids in the region of Marche, Italy, where I originally come from. And the greatest gift that my mom gave me in this sense is to make me understand, since I can remember, since I was a little kid, that it's totally normal, and in fact is totally expected, that a woman has a career, has a life, can become a doctor, a professor, can become a practicing physician, a practicing scientist. And that has been an incredible gift that over the years I have appreciated more and more. And I really wish that in a day like today, she could have been here with us to listen to this conversation and to be proud of people like Delia, like Adriana, like Alba. If my mom was here, guys, she would have loved this moment. And of course, Giusy and the ambassador and the others. So with this, I'll thank you very much again for the invitation, and I'll give it back to our great host, Alan Landy.
Thank you, Guido, for those really remarkable remarks on your life, and especially related to your mother as one of the first physicians in Italy. I think that's just amazing to see the career you've had and the influence of women on your career. I'll turn to our next speaker, Galit Alter. Galit, again, another longtime friend, is a professor of medicine at the Harvard Medical School and a group leader at the Ragon Institute at Massachusetts General Hospital, MIT, and Harvard. It's a great opportunity here to hear from Galit and her work on antibodies and COVID. Galit, over to you.
Thanks, Alan, and thank you for the invitation to be here today. There's nothing more dear to my heart than celebrating women, and especially women in science. And the reason is that I think that we as women have a unique opportunity. There's a statement that I love, and it is, I am woman, hear me roar. And this is really our moment in history where I think as women, we can stand up and we can say that we can break dogma, we can begin to truly understand scientific processes and change the way we do medicine and really begin to make an impact in human health. So I'm going to just give you a couple examples of really the few really exciting moments for me in the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, where it was really wonderful to have a chance to start to break this dogma. Okay, so for me, really my work really begins with this idea that I was programmed during university to believe that antibodies that are generated by a vaccine that can bind to a virus and can block infection, that these are the only antibodies we need to prevent infection and disease. And what we've learned over 20, 30, 40, 50 years of immunology, by wonderful scientists all around the world, is that antibodies do so much more than just simply bind and block infection. And in fact, the majority of the antibodies that we generate following infection or following disease are patrolling our body every second, every minute, and they're looking for aberrant material. And once they recognize this aberrant material, whether it's a virus or an infected cell, these antibodies act as incredibly important signaling molecules that bring in the immune system to rapidly eradicate the disease, harnessing immunity from within the tissue localized compartment. And so this revelation to me was incredibly important 15 years ago as I began to establish my career as a female scientist, really aiming to ask an unaddressed question in science, really trying to focus in on the scientific question that others were not asking. And this is really what led to the discovery and the development of tools in my laboratory that have really begun to redefine how antibodies fight infection and disease. Now, in SARS-CoV-2, we rapidly applied this tool and began to think, about how can we really understand what matters for protective immunity as we were just beginning to develop vaccines. And in this process, I wanted to show you one, little example of how, different these antibodies might be, the antibodies that provide protection versus those who, we think classically might be important in driving survival from infection. And so here what I'm going to show you is just evolution of antibodies in individuals who have severe SARS-CoV-2 infection that either survive the infection in yellow or who ultimately pass away. And what I'm just going to show you here in the middle is that if we just measure the ability of antibodies to neutralize virus, these typical antibodies we think are important against infection, what we found was that the evolution of the neutralizing antibodies in people who died versus those who survived in the yellow line were on top of each other. There was no difference in the evolution of this particular quality of antibodies, suggesting that neutralization is not really what is discriminating or helping individuals overcome the infection once it has occurred. Conversely, when we looked at the ability of antibodies to recruit the immune system to clear the virus and to eliminate infected cells, what we found here is one example that antibodies that can recruit monocytes to drive opsonophagocytic clearance evolved much more rapidly and to a much higher level in individuals who survived the disease. And so what this told us is very early on in the pandemic, early in 2021, as we began to already see that these other functions of antibodies, these other mechanisms by which the immune system fights the disease are potentially more critically important for resolving and for controlling this particular pathogen. We extended this work over the pandemic to begin to understand other facets of SARS-CoV-2 infection, focusing in on a very important condition called long COVID, which has affected women disproportionately. More women suffer from this disease, and this is really quite striking. And the question, of course, is why is it that these women are developing more symptoms for longer periods of time after surviving COVID-19 infection? And we began to look at antibody profiles in these particular individuals who develop COVID-19. And what we found was very interestingly, if you look at just antibody profiles in women who develop long COVID in the blue versus the women who do not develop COVID-19, we found very different antibody profiles across these groups of individuals. Now, more importantly, if we look only at the women versus the men who develop long COVID, what we find here is that women in the pink have completely different antibody responses than the men, completely different long COVID profiles. And what's even more interesting, when we look at really what makes, what is really most predictive of differences in long COVID, what we find is one common signature that is the enrichment of CMV-specific antibodies, a virus that we know causes long-term infection. But interestingly, that these CMV-specific responses are selectively expanded in women, really giving us a target profile for how we can begin to rethink about how we treat individuals who suffer from this particular disease, and particularly women who seem to suffer from it more. Now, the last thing I want to leave you with is this idea that, we have always been fascinated by, the immunology in women. And one area of immunology that I find absolutely fascinating that has been completely understudied is the immunology of pregnancy. Now, pregnancy is one of the most marvelous experiences that women can, have in their lives, which is an incredible remodeling of the immune system, the ability to essentially allow a graft to grow within our bodies and then to give birth to this human that is really only partially sharing self-antigens. And so over the pandemic, we were also able to study how vaccination works in pregnancy, to begin to understand how we can make vaccines that could potentially be more impactful and to help pregnant women who unfortunately were disproportionately also affected by SARS-CoV-2 with higher rates of COVID-19. And so just to give you a couple of examples of this data, just comparing non-pregnant women to pregnant women to lactating women, when we just compare IgG levels to the COVID-19 vaccines, we see very nice, very comparable levels of COVID-19 specific antibodies induced by the mRNA vaccines. But interestingly, and Alba and Delia will love this, is to see that the T-cell response was very different. So although the women make great antibodies, whether they're pregnant or lactating, they are not making as many T-cell responses, really telling us that we need to understand pregnancy better to develop vaccines that will help these women more effectively. And their antibody functions are also very different, with pregnant women who have very small antibody quality responses, lactating women sitting intermediate to that profile, and then the non-pregnant women who have much bigger responses. So much more to do to really begin to not only understand the science of sex differences, but also to push breaking dogma. And so my advice to all the women in the audience, the trainees, like Alba said, is be brave, be confident, break dogma, and really relish the opportunities we have in science these days as women. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you so much, Galit, for those very elegant remarks and really moving forward on understanding more about antibodies and its function in COVID. Really breaking ground and breaking science for our understanding. We have a few minutes left in our group here in our discussion to be able to have some group discussions. And I know there was one question from Q&A about international collaboration. We heard a lot about that, especially we saw in Alba's talk, a lot of the international groups working together. So the question today is and I think, Delia and others have talked about the club, women's club and Italian scientists, but can I hear people's thoughts about international collaboration between women scientists or scientists in general? How does that enhance the fields? And I don't know who would want to take that on first. Who would like to take that on initially? Maybe Alba, could you maybe comment as a junior scientist how did you set up all of your collaborations and how do you see doing that more from an international perspective?
There is a lot of talk among scientists, I guess, and many scientists getting excited about T cells as help fostering collaboration. Many of those collaborations we had previously for other infection, of course, and that help in fostering the initial interaction. But I would say international collaboration is critical, particularly at the early stage career, because it helps you open your mind and actually see how you can do science in a different way. And that's what enriches also your career.
And as a young scientist, one of the questions that comes up for women in science is, were there barriers to your ability to do? We heard, I think Guido made some important remarks that you really were very fierce in the lab. You were independent, doing what you thought and doing some phenomenal science. So how do you see yourself and where your career has come and who has helped you? Are there other women scientists that you look towards who've helped you along in your career?
Yeah, so I guess in my specific case, I have a woman scientist that was one of my mentors, but the two persons that fostered the most my career were two men, kind of showing that indeed, if you have the right mentor, it doesn't matter what gender the mentor is, they just foster your capability and let them flourish. And so I am very thankful to Massimo Micosante, my first mentor, that was a life mentor. And the first thing that he did was actually let me go away from this shell that sometimes we are put as young women to be silent in a corner and unable to speak. And he kind of teach me the importance to stand up and let people hear my voice. And he was a powerful person, and I'm really sorry because he passed away a few years ago, but I gotta say I got sufficiently lucky because Alex efficiently and fantastically take over his spots in doing that. So part of the reason why I can do that is because I have mentors that allowed me to do that.
Right. Adriana, how does your group of women scientists work? Do you help mentor young scientists? And do you include men in your Women in Science Club from Italy?
Actually, one of the ideas was to get together and help also confidence and self-confidence of younger investigators, also to see that it was not so impossible to, you know, work, publish, and also achieve certain positions. Our club is international because many of the women, the Italian women, are actually working in other countries like United States, UK, Singapore, or whatever. And all of us, I think, because I've been working also abroad. I was at NIH, and I was also in Fauci and Gallo's lab at the times of HIV. And I still see my mentor at NIH was a woman, Hilda Kleiman, and we meet almost every year. So, you know, we kept a strong boundary, which helps also. And since Guido was talking about, you know, also women and influence, certainly also for me, my mom was a mathematician. And I would say I'm really always grateful to Margaret Foti, which is the Chief Executive Officer of AACR, American Association for Cancer Research, because she is a typical role model of a successful woman in organizing the largest cancer research association and also promoting journals, ideas about sponsoring science with the government, and was one of the first founders of Women in Cancer Research, you know, leadership forum. And I think we should contribute in the network to constructing and teaching also how to make you know, a girl's path to success in science.
Right. Delia, who inspired you in your career in sciences, becoming a highly successful woman scientist, and what you've done with your career? What would you say to that?
It's a nice question, because actually, going back to my mind, I don't have the as a reference, as an inspiration person, a female person that inspired me for the scientific career. I guess this is because I am older, for example, compared to Alba. Probably now there are good examples, but when I started, there weren't. But I have examples of very inspiring women that I met during my my life. For example, I come from the tuberculosis field, and there are two women that I would like to mention, and one is from United States. Her name is Joanne Flynn, and the other one is from Italy and is Daniela Cirillo. So they both work in tuberculosis in different fields, but they have something in common that is very special. They have a lot of energy, they have a lot of enthusiasm, and they are very robust scientifically and are able to make people working together. So they have a very synergistic ability to make people working together. And they did change the field of tuberculosis, for example, in terms of pathogenesis for Flynn, or in terms of diagnostic tools for Cirillo. So they are good examples, not in my educational, but now.
Right. What would you say to a young girl in high school or grade school today about science, medicine, STEM, for instance? It doesn't, we're talking medicine, immunology, but it could be any part of the STEM curriculum. How would you advise a young woman today, given what you've gone through in your career?
I think that if they want to do science, it's a beautiful job, because they will be happy for all their life, because they will pose questions and they will answer these questions through a methodological fashion, and that it will be very coherent and very logic. But they have to have in mind that they have to be very strong. They have to be very determined. They really have to know from the beginning what they want to achieve, because it will be tough. So this word is tough. Therefore, they have to know in advance. They have to know that they have to work more than men, at least now. At least this is my experience. And they have to do networking more than what my generation did. I guess men do better than women for many reasons, but one of these is that they are very good in making networks. I guess they are used since the beginning, since they were children, to play together. For example, they do games like soccer in Italy that imply playing together. That is not obvious for women, at least in my generation. I did artistic gymnastics, so I was alone. I played in a team, but I was alone. So we need, what I would suggest to a young STEM student is to think that they have to be strong, determined, ignore those that they don't esteem you, and to do networking within women, because this can help them a lot compared to what my generation of women did.
Great. Galit, what are your thoughts on the subject?
Yeah, so that's it's such a hard question, but I think that I agree with Delia 1000% on everything she said about commitment, the opportunity to be creative for your entire life. There's nothing like STEM when it comes to being able to be creative and have impact directly on human life. I think that for me, one of the big pieces is that, like Delia said, this is one facet of STEM I think is really important, is it is fiercely competitive, right? And this is something that I think we don't talk about, and we don't teach this. We don't teach this in high school. We don't teach this in university. We learn it in competitive sports. Delia, you're absolutely right. We learn how to be fierce and to be brave and to be strong and to be committed. But we don't teach this necessarily when we go into these areas of, future careers. And there's something about the people that inspired me all my life, Alan, which I think you kind of fall into that category, is people who are fiercely committed and they don't mind the competition because they know they're on the brink of a huge discovery. And that, excitement, that exhilaration, that adrenaline rush, this is something that, scientists feel, and we get to have this feeling every day and from an intellectual perspective. And the ability to share that adrenaline rush with our colleagues and our collaborators, this is what makes it so very special in this area, right? Those incredible New England Journal studies that Delia has done, those, huge international studies that Alba's done, the work that Adriana describes. I mean, this is really about bringing in a community together to ask really the hardest possible questions and knowing that whatever comes of that question is going to be incredibly impactful and something that you can rejoice and enjoy and, for a long time. And that to me is what makes STEM so special. And so, I have my 10-year-old girls, I tell them every day that mommy is the luckiest, woman, or scientist, because I go in every day and I get to ask a new, really creative question. And I get to enjoy that experience with all my mentees and my colleagues and the whole scientific community. And so I'm a big advocate for science as a career for young women.
So would you encourage your two 10-year-old girls to become scientists? And
Well,
what happens at home?
Oh yeah, so I knew you'd ask me that. So I always ask them, I said, are you as brave as mommy? And that challenge is enough to get any girl excited. And so, I tell them there's many careers where you can have an impact, right? Their daddy doesn't do as, he does research as well. So they see it all the time. But the question really is, do you want this? Do you want this constant, rush? And it's not for everyone, right, Alan? And that's important to recognize. But the one thing is that women should never be scared. They should never think that they are second rate. They should never think they cannot have a family. They should never think they cannot have it all. And if anything, I think, women, tend to do this groundbreaking work. We've heard about this, incredible challenge to dogma by all of us on these calls, really calling science, up to the highest level. And I think that's what we need to inspire and let our little girls realize their dreams, any dream.
Yeah,
Great.
I did that with, actually, I was thinking that my daughter is a pharmacologist. I have a son and a daughter. And I thought I was a terrible mother because I was spending long hours in the lab until late the weekends, that she would hate me. But actually, when she got her PhD and after the dissertation, say that it was good for her to see with how much time we would devote to research and how much enthusiasm, and that made her think there was a good path in her life too. So somehow we can transmit.
Great. There was I think a critical question for Dr. Goletti about balancing research and patient care and family. So maybe Delia, maybe you could comment, or others as well, on that point, because I think that's a critical one for women in science.
I think it's critical for women, but also for men.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is critical because you have to combine different important aspects of your life. And these questions is very often asked to women and not to men, Alan, in a way. And I don't think it's fair because...
Okay. This was a question from the audience, so I will take it.
Yeah,
but you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
But anyway, you asked me and I answer. My husband, I guess, is looking at me. So I think that he definitely supported me, and my children did support me, because otherwise it would have been very difficult. But I think it's a question to pose to anyone. Well, in this earth, and I think that we need the support to people around us, always, male and female. And you are correct. This is especially difficult if you do science, if you do clinical works, if you want a family. But as Galit said in a beautiful way, I think that we can do many different things. Women are multitasking by definition. They are very well organized. They know how to use time. They know they want things to be done, because I mean, we are used by centuries that we need to finish what we start because we have to do it. Otherwise, others don't do it. So I think all these qualities are very important for women, but I guess also for men. And I mean, it's a wish that women will have more part in the decision process, not only for them, but I think for all of us, because we can bring a lot to what is the now organization.
Well, I can't agree more. I think there are some generational, and everybody's mentioned that, and even me being in a different generation than some like Alba or others, that there are differences, and I see in my children and my son and daughter-in-laws or so on, the partnerships are they are partners, and I agree with you. There's much differently, and I see many of my scientific colleagues now, and the male, they're when their wife has a child, they're taking time, paternity leave. That's much more common today, to spend time as a physician or a scientist at home and help care for the child and raise the child and work. And I think COVID has taught us that we don't have to be in an office all the day, or even as a scientist. There are people here from all over the world. When I ask Alba where she was, she lives in San Diego. No, I'm in London. I'm in England today because I'm visiting. So you find people everywhere in the world, and I think it's a great tribute to society that we're changing the norms. And I think that's the critical part. We need to change the norms globally to really allow for people to really work together and be partners across. So are there any other final comments before we end today? And I'd like to thank everybody. Anybody else? I don't know if Guido's still with us or somebody else who I haven't asked to make any final comments or remarks. If not, I'd really like to thank the Italian embassy. I'd like to thank, Guido, did you want to say something before we go?
Just
okay. I really would like to thank. I'm sorry?
I'd like to thank Juicy too, who really did a lot of work.
Well, I was going to say yes. And I'd like to thank the ambassador, Zappia, who really, her opening remarks were phenomenal and inspiring to kick off this important day to us. And And I'd like to thank all the folks from the Italian Embassy who sponsored this today. This has been a phenomenal time. And all the speakers and contributors, you were absolutely wonderful and awe-inspiring. And I'm sure I'll take, and we'll have the recordings for people to hear what you've said and go back and listen, because I think it really will be helpful for all of the folks out there and women and girls in science to be inspired for where they will take their careers next. Again, thank everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you soon, hopefully in person. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everyone.
Ciao.
Ciao.